And now I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Madam President. We would like to thank the Special Envoy of the Secretary-General, Mr. Geir Pedersen, and the USG, Mark Lowcock, for their presentations. Today's meeting, unfortunately, is a textbook example of the general picture of how the Syrian issue has been discussed in the Security Council. We see that humanitarian problems are distorted. They certainly do exist. We are also very concerned by what is happening. However, having said that, we very much understand the primary reason for them, and we ask everybody not to forget about them. This is not the activity of the regime and their partners, but rather the activities of terrorists who are working in the area. We shouldn't forget that without the terrorists, then the efforts of our Western colleagues to overthrow the powers, then Syria wouldn't be facing these terrible problems and the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people, and also that affect the lives of many millions of others. Syrians and the representatives or people from other countries can never forget that history, as my British colleague said, will judge those who, because of their geopolitical ambitions, have almost destroyed this country, and those who have helped them within the Security Council by printing mendacious and untested information to impede the political process that would lead to national reconciliation. Even if you don't have the test tubes full of supposed samples, and today people are using footage from YouTube, but nonetheless the problem remains as I've described it. Russia certainly supports the Special Envoy, Geir Pedersen, and is taking active measures to promote the political process and to establish trust between the parties to the Syrian conflict. As has already been noted, intensive work has been going on through the Astana format together with Iran and Turkey, in cooperation with the Special Envoy and in coordination with the government of the Syrian Arab Republic and the opposition. I'd like to emphasize that this format is the only forum which is helping political reconciliation in Syria. The most recent meeting in the Astana format took place on the 1st and the 2nd of August. Its characteristic feature was the participation of Beirut and Baghdad as new observers. In mid-September, as you know, we plan the latest 5th summit of the guarantor countries in Turkey. The meeting that I mentioned in Nur Sultan took place in a constructive atmosphere where all participants, first and foremost the guarantor countries, were looking for compromise and to improve effective cooperation. We hope that soon, even despite the ever more blatant efforts of our Western colleagues to impede this process, we will be able to launch the Constitutional Committee. Like Geir, we have optimism that the preparation work on this track will soon be completed. Having said that, I insistently, and I'd like to emphasize that, I insistently encourage all parties who are genuinely interested in the political process being successful and who want to work to have a stable settlement in Syria, not to throw a spanner in the works of these efforts. A lot has already been done. Any confrontational or unbalanced discussions or actions, including within the UN, will not help the progress towards a political settlement in Syria. I'll be quite honest, they would directly impede the efforts of Mr. Pedersen, which is not what we want. In the joint statement between Russia, Turkey and Iran as part of the Astana meeting on the 2nd of August, we emphasised the need to establish calm on the ground by fully implementing all of the agreements on Idlib. First and foremost, the Sochi Memorandum of the 17th of September 2018. We express serious concern in connection with the increasing prevalence of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham in this zone of de-escalation. and we confirmed our decisiveness in continuing cooperation in trying to finally eradicate the terrorists. All of this, of course, while complying with the sovereignty, independence, unity and territorial integrity of Syria. The situation in the Syrian Arab Republic, in particular in Idlib, was discussed during the course of negotiations between presidents of Russia and Turkey on the 27th of August, where they confirmed the Russian-Turkish understanding on this and other issues. Madam President, Idlib really does remain the main theatre of tension. Recently, Tahrir al-Sham has de facto turned this region into a bridgehead for attacks on the positions of the Syrian governmental forces and civilians in nearby towns and cities. Only this month, the fighters have been able to carry out more than 20 attacks on the positions of Syrian forces, during which more than 400 people were killed and around 230 Syrian personnel were injured. Several dozens of civilians were also injured. Furthermore, attacks are also continuing on Russian military facilities in Syria. Thus, the Khmeimim airbase in August alone was attacked 4 times by the terrorists with missiles. If you were to believe our British colleagues saying that in Idlib there are more infants than terrorists, then it would seem that many of these infants have grown beards and they know how to use the latest weapons. Don't you think this is rather bizarre? We certainly do. In answer to the constant provocation from terrorists and to reduce the threat for civilians, the Syrian army, with the support of Russian aviation, has been compelled to undertake response measures. In doing this, we must emphasize that all of these activities were carried out strictly within the demilitarized zone, which was to have been established a year ago pursuant to the Sochi Memorandum of the 17th of September 2018. Here, the possibilities of a reconciliation were mentioned, but nobody mentioned that the Syrian government agreed to do the ceasefire in Idlib, and this agreement was reached in Nur Sultan on the 2nd of August. But only if all parties complied with the Sochi Memorandum, which would mean the withdrawal of heavy weapons. However, terrorists from Hayat Tahrir al-Sham refused to comply with the ceasefire and to withdraw fighters beyond the line of de-escalation. Thus, the ceasefire didn't take place. And the fault for this doesn't lie in Damascus, but with terrorists who are continuing to bombard Idlib. Russian and Syrian military forces are making efforts so that the real situation in the Idlib de-escalation zone has been reported as widely as possible in the press. Thus, on the 26th of August, representatives of more than 20 Russian and European media outlets visited the area around Khan Sheikhoun that had been liberated by Syrian government forces in the southeast of Idlib province. Yes, this is the same Khan Sheikhoun where the white helmets in that time carried out a blatant provocation alleging that the Syrian forces had used chemical weapons. This is something that we have debunked loud and clear for some time now. Journalists were themselves able to see with their own eyes how the terrorists are making use of civilian infrastructure for military ends, and to look at the fighters' network of holdings. For this, we've heard from our Western colleagues, and of course, we hadn't heard the things the way they put them. But the journalists from these Western countries didn't fear finding out the truth about the regions for themselves. On other regions in Syria, then we are concerned by the ongoing instability in the northeast of the country. Despite the alleged end of ISIL, terrorists are continuing their underground activity and are activating their so-called sleeping cells. This also makes it complicated in terms of the fighting between Kurdish formations and Arab Sunnites, which is also taking place in this territory. The Russian position on this remains unchanged. We advocate re-establishing territorial integrity and sovereignty in Syria as a guarantee of national security for neighbouring countries and to achieve regional stability as a whole. Madam President, the overall humanitarian situation in the northeast of Syria also remains difficult. A clear example of this is the situation at the Al-Hol IDP camp, which is on territory not under the control of the Syrian authorities. We have been asking for a long time that the forces who control this territory share with us and with everybody what is actually happening there. However, as previously, we've had no information. There's a full vacuum on what is actually happening there. Therefore, we have a logical question about the humanitarian stability in Syria. Why is it that your attention is focused almost exclusively on certain other provinces, but the Syrians who live in the northeast, are you indifferent to them? Is it not true that civilians are dying there as the result of the activity of fighters and that infrastructure has been destroyed? We have data suggesting that that's true and that we share that data with you. But do you not have that information, or are you simply not interested in what's happening there? We're also worried by the situation in the Tanf zone. We want to once again recall that the occupying power is responsible for the population on the territory that's been occupied. That's pursuant to the Geneva Convention, and that covers all the areas that I've listed. Russia, together with the Syrian government, has already been said, working in coordination with UN specialized agencies, is continuing work on the Rukban camp, which is in the zone of illegal American occupation, and on allowing people to return home. In the second half of August, the OHCHR mission, OCHA mission rather, with the Syrian Arab Red Crescent, looked and visited those people who wanted to leave. During the course of the month, we plan to organise letting these people out, or around 16,000 of them. On the whole, beginning with March, Rukban has been left by around 18,000 refugees. Following the evacuation, virtually all of them were able to return to their place of permanent residence on territory under the control of Damascus. We continue to proceed from the principle that humanitarian assistance should be provided to all Syrians across the territory of Syria without the establishment of any preconditions. What's important here is helping re-establish Syria, which should be done in close cooperation with the norms of international humanitarian law, the principles of neutrality, non-bias and impartiality. We need to work on establishing the conditions and helping safe and voluntary return for refugees and IDPs to their places of residence in Syria, and to guarantee them the rights to return and rights to support. Madam President, I cannot not share the observation about the logic that we see every time. As soon as the Syrian forces achieved some kind of advantage on the territory and begin to force terrorists out, our colleagues begin to say that we should stop military activity. They forget about our overall decision that there is a need to have an uncompromising fight against terrorists. As we've today seen, we're seeing these terrorists turn into influence in this latest example, and that Russia is supposed to be bombing hospitals and schools that, in most cases, either they didn't exist or they weren't subject to any kind of strike. We refute all of this, but nobody listens to us. The task isn't, it seems to be, to establish the truth, but rather to move back Syria's movement towards peace as led by its legal government and its elected president. I want to disappoint you. This process cannot be turned back. There's a consensus in the case in the favour of a new peace in Syria, and that consensus already exists. Terrorists and those who support them no longer hold the upper hand. You won't be able to save them. The earlier you understand this, gentlemen, the quicker we will find peace on this Syrian land that has suffered so much, and the more lives we will be able to save. Don't forget this enormous responsibility to history and future generations that today is on your shoulders. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement.